It began with a glitch, at least that's what NASA thought. A meaningless spike, a flicker of heat, a dip in mass density that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Nothing that could survive peer review, nothing that could stand against 3 layers of calibration. But on the morning of November 26, 2025, the glitch came back. Then it repeated. And when the data stabilized, the screens in mission control froze. Not from failure, but from disbelief. Inside the core of 3I Atlas, the fastest interstellar object ever detected, something had moved. Before you go, I want to hear from you. If 3I Atlas truly holds a structured, repeating, impossible system inside its core, if NASA just caught something acting with intention, what do you think it means? Comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? What time is it right now? And most importantly, do you believe 3I Atlas is natural or something engineered? Let's back into the topic, the time signature emerging from 312 meters below the surface, a lattice of organized energy that behaved less like geology and more like a machine trying to stay quiet. For the first time since the object entered the solar system, the debate inside NASA stopped. No one argued calibration errors. No one blamed solar wind noise. Every expert in the room understood the same impossible truth. This wasn't a natural structure. It was a system. The data that triggered the alert came from a rare orbital alignment, one that only occurs once every 82 days, when 3I Atlas turns just enough to expose its deep interior to a low-angle scan. NASA's core imaging array seized the opportunity. What emerged from the analysis wasn't a fractured nucleus, or a chaotic interior typical of long-period comets. It was order. Perfect concentric layers, uniform, equidistant, arranged with mathematical discipline, each one wrapped around a central corridor barely a kilometre wide. Not dust strata, not ice fractures, not pressure-formed shells, stable bands, 11.2 metres apart, each layer spaced with the precision of a machine tolerance. And the deeper the scan reached, the stranger it became. Between shells 3 and 4, traces of boron silicate glass, material that on Earth only forms in controlled thermal environments, appeared in clean sheets, acting as a radio frequency insulator. Below that, metallic composites with densities approaching 3.7 g Mecn3, far beyond what any natural comet could sustain without collapsing under its own stress. This wasn't random accretion. This was architecture. And then came the detail that broke thermodynamic models outright. The central chamber, the heart of 3I Atlas. While the outer layers heated, cooled, and fluctuated as any solar-struck object would, the core remained frozen at 2.7 Kelvin, the exact temperature of the cosmic microwave background, not colder, not warmer, locked, as if the material inside wasn't absorbing heat at all, or worse, as if something was actively holding that temperature steady. That was when internal memos began using a phrase never meant for public release: stable, energy-regulated containment hierarchy. The truth was simple and horrifying. Nature can repeat, but it does not repeat with logic. As analysts assembled the temperature logs, they discovered the first true anomaly of the sequence. Every 78 minutes, without fail, a micropulse of heat radiated from the region beneath the upper shell. It wasn't strong, it wasn't chaotic, it was timed. 78 minutes, 19 seconds, over and over. ESA confirmed it. JAXA confirmed it. India's DEVA satellite confirmed it. The object wasn't reacting to sunlight. It wasn't venting. It wasn't unstable. It was operating. Heat pulsed across internal corridors, channels that matched perfectly with the concentric boundaries scientists had just mapped. These weren't fractures. They were conduits. Every pulse followed the same route, the same geometry, the same frequency. Like a thermostat, like a regulation loop, like a clock. At that point, even the skeptics went silent, because one detail shattered any hope of natural interpretation. Each pulse produced a faint electromagnetic field, not random static, directional, projected away from the core on a fixed vector, not toward the Sun, not toward Jupiter, toward deep space, aimed. That was when ISRO's spectral team made the discovery that changed the temperature anomaly from strange to impossible. The pulse frequency matched known subharmonic signatures used in regulated plasma devices. On Earth, these frequencies exist inside reactors. 3I Atlas had just produced one, from its core, and that was only anomaly Gamma 13A. The deeper NASA dug, the clearer the pattern became. The spin of 3I Atlas, initially assumed chaotic, was too stable, too consistent, too deliberate. Over weeks of observation, its rotational axis remained aligned within a single degree of a fixed point in the Lyra constellation, the direction it originally entered the solar system from. Coincidence was ruled out when its axis performed a precise 26.1-hour nod, synchronized perfectly with the thermal pulses. Imagine a top that adjusts its wobble using an internal gyroscope. Now imagine that top is not a child's toy, but a 30-kilometer wide interstellar object. The nod wasn't drift, it was targeting. 3 vertices of its axis alignment pointed to 3 exact gravitational anchors: Jupiter, the galactic center, and Earth, not approximately, within 0.05 degrees. As if the object were calibrating its orientation across 3 references, like a triangulation algorithm. The implications were brutal. 3I Atlas wasn't just spinning, it was aiming. And when NASA overlaid telemetry from 3 independent agencies, the triangulation revealed something no one wanted to believe. Every time the axis pointed at Earth, internal radio scattering dropped. Every time it pointed at Jupiter, its jets slowed. Every time it aligned with the galactic center, a faint infrared spike emerged from the core. This wasn't motion, this was behavior. Behaviors that only made sense if something inside was responding, or watching. Then came anomaly. J13B, the reflectivity spike. A radar blast from ESA's subsurface array hit the core wall at precisely the wrong angle, and something inside reflected it back like a polished dish. Not scattered, not distorted, reflected. As if the internal surface was engineered to bounce communication frequencies. When analysts broke down the return signal, the profile wasn't single-layered. It contained depth-tiered reflections, like a layered crystalline interface, behaving almost exactly like a phased array. And at the moment of the spike, the surface warmed, not chaotically but evenly by 3.2 Kelvin. A pulse of interaction. Then silence. No debris, no sublimation. Just a single precise response, and then the strangest detail. The reflected signal was aimed directly toward Earth. The object wasn't just reflecting energy, it was choosing direction. Then, anomaly, J13C, the compressed mass layer, a 75-meter-thick ring inside the core where density surged by 400%, a localized collapse that acted like an internal shock absorber. Every solar flare that hit the surface triggered a vibration inside the layer, responding faster than thermal conduction could explain. It behaved like a damped spring, like a force management system. And after a sudden drop in solar wind, the entire dense layer expanded by 2.7 meters, perfectly evenly, then emitted a repeating low-frequency radiation pulse. Nothing in nature expands that evenly under that kind of stress. Nothing, unless it was built to. Then 3I Atlas began to pulse electromagnetically. Every 11 minutes, magnetic surges rippled outward from its midsection. Plasma in its tail curved back toward the core, looping along fixed paths like particles in a magnetic bottle. Then, for 9 seconds, its magnetic field inverted, flipping polarity and disrupting radio relays on Earth's dark side. A natural comet cannot invert its magnetic field, but a circuit can. Then the plumes began. 2 perfect opposite-side eruptions firing at the same millisecond, identical in speed, charge, angle, and density. Not outgassing, not pressure release, a maneuvering event, a reaction vector, a system adjusting its rotation with precision our spacecraft struggle to match. And after the plumes curved inward, slowing, cooling, returning, NASA realized the truth. The object was recycling its own expelled mass, like a vehicle conserving fuel. Like something trying not to waste resources, like something aware of its journey. Then came the optical anomaly, light bending inside the comet in perfect arcs, rotating, polarization in ways that only engineered metamaterials can, like photonic waveguides, like internal signal routing. Then the rotational lock, The wobble stopped, dead, within minutes. Then the magnetic anchor, a stationary field 160 kilometers away from the object, holding position like a clamp in the solar wind. Then particle emissions that shifted forward in time, not drifting, but accelerating on a mathematical slope used in data transmission. Then the jets reversed direction, inhaling instead of exhaling. Then the internal cavity echoed radar pulses with cathedral precision. Then plasma jets began firing at prime number intervals, as if counting, as if signaling, and finally, the gravitational pulses, tiny rhythmic distortions in local space-time, not enough to bend light, but enough to reveal the truth. There is something inside 3i Atlas, not solid, not fluid, not geological, a structured energy lattice, a field engine, a system breathing, and every anomaly points to the same conclusion. This object was not built to drift, it was built to arrive. They had catalogued anomalies like a litany, 13A through 13T, and still the universe kept handing them new questions. What comes next is not a line item in a research paper. It's the moment when policy, physics, and panic collide. Night fell over mission control and the monitors didn't. They glowed, they pulsed. Every screen in the room now shared the same impossible truth. Whatever lived inside 3i Atlas was not inert. It was orchestrating behavior on multiple fronts, and it was doing so with terrifying coherence. First, the cadence changed. Everything that had been rhythmic, the 78-minute heat pulses, the 42.7 Hz subharmonic matches, the prime-numbered plasma jets, shifted phase. Not randomly. All timing markers crept forward by the same fractional slope, like a clock being wound by an invisible hand. Engineers noted the slope mathematically. It wasn't noise, it was a ramp function. The object's internal clock was accelerating. When clocks accelerate, you no longer get to pretend this is a passive system. Second, the reach widened. Signals that had once been local disturbances in microwave bands now bled into navigation networks. Low-frequency EM transients, previously too weak to affect humans, nudged GPS timing windows by milliseconds. High-precision timekeeping platforms, the atomic clocks that keep global finance, aviation, and satellite constellations in sync, logged anomalies synchronous with 3i Atlas's emission peaks. Analysts called it graceful, an understatement, but to every airline dispatcher and satellite operator watching telemetry, it felt like a shadow on their instruments. Third, the feedback loop grew arms. The particle phase emissions that had been trailing behind the object began to organize at a distance. Dust and micro-debris in its anti-tail no longer behaved as unbound grains. They aligned into filaments that extended outward, coupled by the object's field structures, and then curled back on themselves in precise arcs. In simulation, this looked like an engineer drawing a net behind a boat and then tugging it to steer. If 3i Atlas was steering, then it possessed a control surface of a kind no comet should have. At the observatories, a new debate both united and terrified the teams. Are we seeing propulsion, or are we witnessing a communication protocol that uses matter as its carrier? Across agencies, the language shifted from anomalous to operational. Internal cables were rerouted. Protocols that traditionally stayed in classified vaults were opened. Briefings escalated to cabinet-level cryptographers and physics teams, and the first real-world contingency planning began. Not for impact, not for evacuation, for interpretation, for the need to know what a system like this might ask, or demand, of a planet. Theories multiplied like storm fronts. Theory 1, a maintenance cycle. A long-dormant construct travelling the galaxy keeps a distributed maintenance algorithm. Every so often, when it crosses the thermal threshold or a particular magnetic aperture, its subunits run diagnostics. The 78-minute pulses and the 42.7 Hz subharmonics are heartbeat diagnostics. The lattice is a set of containment harmonics. The prime-numbered plasma jets are a checksum, a signature to declare I am functional. Theory 2, an indexing breadcrumb. 3i Atlas is not alone. It's a courier, leaving encoded data along its path, phase-shaped particle emissions, field manipulations, refractive photonic guides, so that a companion system can read them later. The back-facing phase-shifted ejections are not waste. They're a slow physical breadcrumb trail. The incoming gravitational micropulses and the sudden wake of a distant responder lend weight to the idea. Something else out there, answered the cue. Theory 3. Active habitat preparation. Perhaps the most disturbing, and politically the hardest to share publicly. The object is not just signalling or stabilizing. It is preparing an environment. The buried cavity, the layered energy lattice, the mass flexing, the anti-tail manipulation. These are all consistent with a system that can alter local fields, trap energy, and shape matter. If that is preparation, then for what is the only question louder than the alarms the instruments were screaming. None of these theories fit neatly. Each one required instruments and physics humanity did not yet possess. But the data refused to lie. The core maintained an eerie thermal neutrality at 2.7 K, even while shells warmed and jets pulsed. The compressed mass layer flexed like a tuned mechanical spring. Radar returns bounced like phased array dishes from within a nucleus. And something, structure, system, or signal, began to answer. Operationally, the next phase was grimly simple. Watch for coupling. Coupling had already begun, photonic bands altering, plasma pulses matching magnetic anchoring, gravitational micropulses syncing to jet reversals. When systems couple, emergent behavior follows. The object's internal resonances found harmonics in its external environment. Jupiter's field, the solar wind, even Earth's magnetosphere, and the network effect accelerated. Small changes amplified. That acceleration triggered urgent simulations. If the lattice was a containment system, what happened when containment tightened? If it was a resonator, what if it reached critical Q factor? Could 3i Atlas release energy not as a plume but as a shaped field? Some models, speculative, mathematical, redacted, suggested scenarios from a benign redistribution of internal stress to environmental modulation at planetary scales. None of them were comforting, and then came the unignorable practical sign that the object had moved from curious to consequential. Spaceborne assets began behaving oddly in its vicinity. A communications relay, passing behind an observation vector, lost sync with Earth by an amount that could not be explained by plasma turbulence. A low Earth orbit microsatellite experienced a spurious attitude correction, and team logs showed its onboard star tracker lost reliability for exactly the duration of an emission cycle. These were not failures of coincidence, they were signature effects, side effects of a system actively reshaping its electromagnetic neighborhood. Internationally, the reaction was muted but intense. Intelligence agencies asked different questions than scientists. Militaries drilled contingency plans not for collision, but for spoofing or denial of service. Lawmakers demanded assessment. Does this represent an existential risk, a technological opportunity, or something that must be engaged? In quieter rooms, the physicists did the only thing they could. They tried to speak back. A coordinated ping was devised, a narrowband microwave pattern, a mathematical handshake of prime sequences, encoded with redundancy and launched with every major deep space transmitter in synchronized pulses. If anything responded to intelligible patterning rather than raw energy, this was the chance to test whether 3i Atlas was listening or merely processing. The result was not contact, it was recognition. A faint phase-shifted echo returned, not a decoded message, not friendly chatter, but a precise temporal offset that matched the internal 78-minute timing within less than a second. The machine had heard the human-made signal and folded it into its own clock. That is not warmth. It is attention. Attention begets reaction. Within hours, the object's outward behavior changed in a way no cometary model allowed. Its emission phasing tightened noticeably, the anti-tail accelerated forward again, and the magnetic anchor reasserted itself with a steadier lock. The compressed mass layer contracted by measurable. Meters and the internal lattice waves rose in amplitude. Whether that was a defensive posture, an operational response, or simply ongoing maintenance was impossible to say, but the implication was clear. The system had integrated the human input into its processes and adjusted. So the central question hardened into a single cold line. Are we observers or participants? If 3i Atlas is an engine, a messenger, or a maintenance courier for an architecture older than civilization, then by observing we have already become part of its timeline. If it is a machine that calibrates to external stimuli, then our probes, our pings, our curiosity alter the experiment. Every pulse we send could be a command, every radar sweep a tap on its control panel. Mission control prepared for the next unavoidable truth. Action has consequences. The object's systems were closing loops. The loops were feeding external fields, and the more we pressed, the faster the loops spun. They had discovered anomaly 13, the one that changed the taxonomy of comets forever. Now they were witnessing the follow-through. The core's lattice was not passive. The clock inside it was accelerating, and whatever it wanted next, it wanted on a schedule. No one in the room claimed to know what that schedule meant, only that it was counting, and humanity had just answered the bell. NASA didn't release the full data packet at first. Internally, the room had gone silent, terrifyingly silent, because after the core map resolved, something else emerged behind it. Something faint, buried in the noise floor but unmistakably geometric. Not a void, not an artifact, not an error in the Fourier reconstruction. A shape. It appeared only for 0.0041 seconds, but the alignment across all three independent arrays confirmed it wasn't a glitch. A structure, thin, angular, and framed by a repeating internal boundary, was sitting inside the neutral 2.7 Kelvin chamber. Not touching the walls, not anchored to material bracing, suspended. It rotated. Not physically. There was no visible mass axis, but the energy signature twisted in a slow, continuous orientation shift, like a hologram turning inside a box. When the analysts increased the contrast mapping, the shape became clearer. A lattice. A perfect 12-point symmetry, and nested at its centre, a pulse. It wasn't bright, it wasn't hot, but it was timed. A tiny, repeating microburst of infrared that pulsed at the exact phase offset as the 78-minute thermal cycle observed on the surface layers, except this one was cleaner. More deliberate. The core wasn't reacting to surface anomalies, the surface anomalies were reacting to it. That's when the Horizon team noticed the detail that changed the entire conversation. The pulse was directional. Every time it fired, it aimed along a vector that rotated in perfect sync with the axis triangulation wobble NASA and EOS were tracking from outside the object. Triangle drawn in the sky by the spin, and a pulse from the core following the same geometric rhythm. The inside was guiding the outside. JPL's data lead put it bluntly in a private log entry later leaked through internal channels. It's behaving like a clock with external hands and an internal regulator. But there was something even stranger, something no one wanted to say aloud. The pulses weren't just timing signals, they were corrections. The core wasn't drifting with the object's rotation, the rotation was drifting with the core, like a ship adjusting its orientation to align with its navigation computer, like a machine adjusting to its internal reference frame. Nothing about this resembled a natural nucleus. No comet carries an internal timing vector. No icy remnant aligns its rotation to a lattice inside its core. Something inside 3i Atlas wasn't simply there, it was running. And the moment scientists realized that the pulse coming from deep inside the nucleus was not only periodic, not only geometric, but predictive, the entire investigation changed direction. Because a system that predicts is a system that expects. And a system that expects is built for one thing. Purpose. For the first 12 hours, NASA believed Anomaly 13 was a singular event, a single structural pulse deep inside 3i Atlas, a freak occurrence buried in noise. But by the time sunrise hit the Pacific tracking stations, the data proved otherwise. The pulse wasn't just repeating, it was changing, not in amplitude, not in power, in behavior. Each new cycle grew more efficient, shaving milliseconds off the rise time, tightening its thermal curve, focusing its heat with surgical precision. It was learning. Inside mission control, the realization hit like a gut punch. The pulse was tuning itself. Every 78 minutes the heat emerged from the same depth, exactly 312 meters. But now, instead of spreading radially across the interior like warmed dust, the energy bent. It flowed along invisible pathways, curved like currents through unseen conduits, following the same internal boundaries mapped days earlier by neutrino scans. The pathways were real. The layers weren't static geology. They behaved more like a circulatory system. And on the 7th pulse, something new happened. Infrared spectrographs captured a brief, whisper-thin spike of blue-shifted radiation, an emission so faint it barely rose above the noise floor. But its timing was perfect, exactly 18 seconds after the heat peak. That timing wasn't random. It matched the electromagnetic oscillations recorded earlier, the ones dismissed as sensor interference. Now the interference had a pulse, and the pulse had a pattern. In the room, nobody said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something inside 3i Atlas was responding, not subconsciously, not chaotically, deliberately. The 8th pulse removed all doubt. Unlike the previous ones, this thermal spike didn't end with a slow cooling curve. It snapped off, instantly, like a switch cut mid-flow. Then the electromagnetic tail bloomed, stronger than any previous oscillation, rippling outward along a single vector. And that vector pointed not toward Jupiter, not toward the galactic center, but directly toward Earth. A straight, unwavering line across millions of kilometers. For 5 full seconds, sensors lit up with the directional signature. A beam of low-frequency modulation so weak it posed no danger, yet precise enough to register even through deep background noise. It wasn't a blast. It wasn't radiation. It was alignment, like an instrument turning its face toward its listener, like a device syncing orientation with a receiver, like a system locking on. NASA froze. Every agency froze. The object wasn't just exhibiting internal cycles anymore, it was broadcasting. But it wasn't broadcasting to deep space. It wasn't calling back toward Lyra. It was locking its internal timing to Earth's position, as if somewhere inside the layered shells, behind the perfect concentric walls, beneath the neutral 2.7K core, a system had just awakened enough to recognize something, or someone. The next pulse would arrive in 78 minutes, the next alignment would refine itself, and analysts already knew, whatever this thing is doing, it is no longer hiding its intent, it's synchronizing, it's calibrating, it's preparing. The first 8 anomalies were just the heartbeat. Now the signal was beginning. The first indication that the anomaly inside 3i Atlas wasn't just a structural curiosity, but something active, came from a single flaw in NASA's modelling. The thermal pulse shouldn't have been strong enough to influence rotation. Not at that depth, not at that temperature, not with that amount of internal buffering. But after pulse 13, the object's spin changed. Nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, just a tightening, like a machine aligning its bearings. Every agency saw it at the same moment. The object's rotational wobble, a subtle precessional drift that had persisted since discovery, suddenly snapped into alignment, a perfect razor-clean axis, fixed, stable, intentional. It didn't drift, it didn't overcorrect, it locked. The timing lined up with the thermal pulse to the second, not minutes later, not gradually, instantly. What followed was even stranger. A faint halo of fine dust, the kind normally carried along by random microjets, fell inward, toward the center, rather than outward into the coma. Instruments saw the particles decelerate, reverse, and descend along invisible tracks, like iron filings finding magnetic lines along a buried coil. The halo collapsed into a thin torus of particulate dust around the midsection. Not a natural dust pattern, a ring, a stabilized mass layer positioned exactly along the axis where an artificial system would place a reaction wheel. Then the ring moved, slow at first, drifting like a tide pulled by internal gravity, but within seconds it began to accelerate, spinning in reverse to the object's rotation, exactly as Earth's satellites use to maintain balance. No known comet, asteroid, or dust-filled rock has ever exhibited internal counter-rotation. Not even close. This wasn't a system trying to survive a spin. This was a system controlling one. As the dust torus stabilized, another signal emerged. Ultra-low frequency, deeper than any plasma emission, riding directly through the nucleus with the clarity of a structural vibration. The thermal pulse wasn't a flare. It was a startup sequence, a warm-up, a boot cycle. And for the first time, the internal structure behaved like something waking up. NASA's analysts tried to mask their panic as the rotational lock solidified. But then came the whisper, a microfield ripple, softer than any electromagnetic noise yet perfectly aligned with the established 78-minute cycle, pulsed outward from the core, barely detectable, barely measurable, but unmistakably crafted. It was a signal deserving of a listening ear, because something inside 3i Atlas had just taken its first breath. The signal didn't fade. If anything, The gravitational pulse grew clearer, like a heartbeat settling into rhythm once the shock wears off. Each wave bent the surrounding space by microns, subtle enough for the universe to ignore, precise enough for every observatory on Earth to feel. But inside 3i Atlas, something else was beginning to answer. Following the 11th recorded gravitational pulse, the inner nucleus shifted temperature, not warming, not cooling, but equalizing, as though it were preparing for a new state. Infrared spreads from the iris array showed the heat map smoothing into a perfect gradient, eliminating all hot spots and cold pockets. No comet does this. Objects tumbling through the solar wind are supposed to be chaotic, uneven, constantly fracturing. But 3i Atlas wasn't equalizing because it was decaying. It was equalizing because it was stabilizing. The thermal inversion that had reversed its jet flow earlier now worked inward, spiraling toward the center. Pressure waves pulsed across the internal strata, pushing against the walls, bouncing in consistent intervals, like sonar pings fired inside a sealed vault. And that's when the shape appeared. A faint outline, buried beneath layers of dust, ions, and refractive bands, but unmistakable. The gravitational wave imprints were reflecting off something sharp-edged inside the core, not spherical, not chaotic, not broken, angular, a geometry that had no business existing inside an interstellar traveller. The outline wasn't large, barely a kilometre across, but its structure was unmistakably deliberate. Panels, ridges, crossbeams, edges aligned in ratios found in engineered, stabilizers and containment architectures, not in rock or ice. NASA didn't release the discovery publicly. They didn't need to. Every private lab connected to the deep field network saw the same thing. The gravitational pulse wasn't just coming from the core, it was being shaped by an object inside it. As the pulses continued, the shape became clearer. Not one object, 3, stacked, layered, nested, like Russian dolls built out of compressed mass and field geometry. The outermost layer matched the observed gravitational frequency at 2.4 seconds. The second layer pulsed in a half-frequency harmonic. The innermost layer pulsed at 1/8 the period, so faint it was nearly undetectable, yet perfectly rhythmic. It was a tri-layered gravitational engine, and with each pulse, the engine grew more active. Dust inside the comet began moving in spirals, forming vortices that aligned with the nested frequencies. These spirals weren't random. They were tracing the edges of the internal structure like iron filings revealing a hidden magnet. The comet was mapping itself, or something inside was mapping the comet. Then the optical distortions returned. Every time the gravitational core pulsed, the photonic waveguides in the inner layers flashed, rotating polarization by exactly 90 degrees. The bands didn't scatter light anymore. They were routing it, channeling it toward the central structure as if feeding it information. Light bent, mass shifted, gravity pulsed, all in lockstep. Something inside the core wasn't just active, it was synchronizing the entire body, shell, layers, jets, fields, into a single operating system. The coma thickened around the nucleus in a perfectly symmetrical halo. The dust tail tightened like a drawn wire. The magnetic anchor outside the body glowed with newly energized flux. The reverse-rotating internal dust field accelerated to match the gravitational pulse rate. Everything, every anomaly, every layer, every behavior, clicked into the same rhythm. Then the core walls responded. The impossible reflectivity spike that perplexed the radar teams intensified. The core wall brightened from within, reflecting gravitational wave resonance like light bouncing off a mirrored surface. Except this mirror bent gravity instead of photons. The internal cavity, previously hollow, stable, silent, now vibrated in harmonic waves, and the cavity wasn't empty anymore. A glow appeared at the center, not heat, not light, something subtler. A blue-white shimmer like the reflection of a star on deep water. It shifted, contracted, then stabilized into a perfect sphere. The first spherical structure ever observed inside a comet nucleus. It didn't radiate heat, it didn't emit particles, it didn't pulse with jets or scatter dust. It floated in the center of the cavity as the internal machinery synchronized around it. A perfect, neutral object, suspended by nothing, responding only to the gravity engine's oscillation. The moment scientists locked onto it, a horrifying realization spread through the deep field network. The sphere wasn't being held by material supports. It was being held by field supports, gravitational containment, inside a comet, inside an object that shouldn't even have internal structure, inside something that had just been assumed natural until it started breathing, stabilizing, computing, and now activating. And then the 12th pulse struck. This one was different, not stronger, not louder, sharper, clean, precise, intentional. The pulse hit the internal sphere, and for the first time the sphere moved, not drifting, not vibrating. It rotated, a slow, deliberate turn, like a lens adjusting, like a component aligning with the rest of the system. The rotation lasted 3 seconds, stopped, then reversed, perfectly, symmetrically, as if the object at the center of 3i Atlas had just switched on, and every instrument on Earth recorded the same conclusion. Whatever was inside that core wasn't dormant anymore. It was awake. Nothing inside 3i Atlas should have been able to move, not under that pressure, not under that temperature, not inside a shell that, by every law of comet physics, should have been nothing more than compressed ice, fractured stone, and ancient dust. But movement appeared anyway. Not a tremor, not a quake, not fragmentation. A shift. A soft internal displacement detected only because the gravitational wave monitors were still locked onto the core. The distortion signature, weak but perfectly shaped, changed its frequency. Not randomly, not chaotically, deliberately. Like a tuning fork being struck again, this time at a slightly different pitch. For 40 seconds, the inner mass of 3i Atlas resonated at a higher frequency, then settled back into its original pulse. Scientists stared at the graph in silence. Objects don't change gravitational frequencies, not unless something inside them is altering density, redistributing mass, rebalancing the internal geometry. The alarm escalated when the next gravitational pulse arrived early. Not by much, just 0.0008 seconds. But in engineering terms, that's intent. By the third pulse, the timing had shifted again, subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking directly at the Lagrange 2 data feed, but unmistakable if you were. It wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't decay, it wasn't noise, it was correction. 3i Atlas was calibrating itself. Then the core's light, previously invisible to optical sensors, flared. A brief flash, filtered through 30 kilometers of layered shells, rendered only as a faint green shimmer along the inner refractive bands. A structured flash. 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, pause. The exact same cadence as its gravitational heartbeat. The object was syncing 3 different systems. Thermal, optical, and gravitational into one unified rhythm. That's not geology. That's orchestration. Infrared sensors detected the aftermath immediately. A new heat signature appeared deep in the cavity. Not a hotspot, not a plume, but a line. A long, thin, perfectly straight line running across the inner chamber. Lines do not form inside comets. Not through erosion. Not through heating. Not through collision. This line glowed faintly, as if it were charging. When ESA overlaid the data with previous cavity scans, something terrifying became obvious. The line was aligned perfectly with the incoming gravitational wavefronts. The core wasn't just resonating, it was channeling. The team ran the numbers. If the line represented a structural element, then its orientation should have drifted with rotation. But it didn't. It stayed fixed, absolutely fixed. No wobble, no drift, no deviation, as if anchored to a frame of reference inside itself. That was the breakthrough. Inside 3i Atlas, something is not rotating with the outer body. Its orientation is decoupled from the shell, behaving like a floating internal axis, a gyroscopic spine, or a guidance rail. For the first time, analysts began using a new word in private logs. Framework, not layers, not strata, not shells, framework. And that's when the next anomaly struck. A low-frequency hum rolled through the object, caught by magnetic sensors across 5 observatories. It wasn't a wave, it was a chord, a harmonic signature with 2 frequencies blending together like a binary tone. Frequency 1, the known gravitational pulse. Frequency 2, a new vibration, deeper, slower. A stabilizing bass note. 2 tones, 1 system. The interior of 3I Atlas had just activated a dual-frequency resonance, something no natural object has ever shown. When mapped into 3D, the resonance formed a geometry, a shape, not a sphere, not a ring, not a spiral, a tetrahedral grid, perfect angles, perfect spacing, perfect symmetry. The interior lattice, previously detected as layered hexagons, had rearranged into a new shape entirely. A tetrahedron is one of the simplest, most stable geometric units in structural engineering. It's used in load-bearing frameworks, energy distribution grids, vibration-resistant architecture, and now, apparently, inside an interstellar comet. The lattice wasn't collapsing, it was reconfiguring, adapting, preparing. The shock came 10 minutes later. The final shape, a triad aligned with the tetrahedral lattice. 3 beams, 3 corners, 1 unified axis. The beams stabilized, then pulsed in perfect synchronization with the gravitational heartbeat. That was the moment NASA issued its quietest, but most urgent, internal advisory. The core is trying to assemble something. No one could deny it anymore. This wasn't thermal, this wasn't chemical, this wasn't geological. The interior structure of 3I Atlas was rearranging itself with mathematical precision, locking into geometric forms that mirrored stabilization grids, structural regulators, energy storage matrices, and signal reinforcement frameworks. Nature can form chaos. Nature can form symmetry by accident, but nature does not form sequential geometric systems that change shape on command. The final frames from that observation window showed one more detail. Small, faint particles drifting toward the triad. Dust, debris, ices. No, their motion ruled that out. The particles didn't drift, they didn't fall. They moved in perfect lines, straight toward the beams as if pulled, at constant speed, at constant angle, not turbulence, not flow, attraction. The core had just turned into a collector, a system, a machine, a mechanism starting its next phase. The triad brightened, the inner lattice tightened, and for the first time scientists watching stopped asking, "What is this thing?" and started whispering, "What is it building?" Something changed inside the core, not the outer jets, not the shell, not the electromagnetic skin, but the pulse. For hours, the gravitational heartbeat of 3I Atlas had held steady at 2.4-second intervals, stable, predictable, almost gentle. But at 0947 UTC, the moment ESA's deep Earth gravimeters first picked up the disturbance, the pulse tightened. It didn't grow louder, it didn't grow stronger, it grew aware. The next reading arrived just 0.04 seconds early. The one after that, 0050, then 09. The object wasn't accelerating randomly. It was reducing latency, like a machine minimizing delay to reach its operational threshold. NASA called it gravitational pulse convergence. But off-record, among the analysts who had been tracking anomaly after anomaly for 36 straight hours, the whispered word was different. Handshake. Because something inside the object behaved as if it was waiting for a reply. And then, impossibly, Earth replied. Not intentionally, not consciously, not by any human-made system. A small, harmless fluctuation in Earth's geomagnetic crust occurred, a pulse barely detectable, a natural microquake deep beneath the South Pacific. But the timing aligned, precisely within 0.008 seconds, with the rising gravitational pulse of 3I Atlas. It was coincidence. It had to be. Except 3I Atlas responded. Its gravitational waveform shifted frequency, matching the Earth's echo like a tuning fork syncing with another. And then the pulse stabilized. Same amplitude, same cadence. Both signatures, Earth's and the object's, locking into a shared rhythm. That was the moment NASA analysts stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped breathing. Because that kind of synchronization is impossible unless one system is adjusting to the other. One living geological body, and one interstellar anomaly that does not behave like matter at all. The next pulse. Cycle arrived not as a single waveform, but as 3. Earth's crust vibrated once. 3I Atlas answered twice. A sequence, a pattern, a message. Whatever sat inside that object's core wasn't just activating. It was communicating through the one medium no natural object could fake, gravity. But the data grew stranger. As the gravitational pulses increased in coherence, the internal dust engine began responding as well. The counter-rotating particle shells inside 3I Atlas tightened into a more rigid formation, spinning faster, denser with each gravitational beat. The dust didn't scatter, it didn't drift, it compressed, as if pulled inward by an unseen algorithm. Then the entire interior lit up with a faint ghost-like luminescence, a soft blue radiance emerging not from heat, but from motion. Dust particles glowing due to accelerated kinetic agitation, a phenomenon seen only in particle confinement chambers and early-stage fusion tests on Earth. Except this wasn't fusion, it was pattern. As the core glowed, the rotating dust formed spirals, 3 of them, interlocking like gears made of starlight. Each spiral rotated on a slightly different axis. Each spiral pulsed with the same 2.4-second rhythm, and when the gravitational beat intensified, the spirals tightened, reshaping into a nested, rotating geometry, a 3-dimensional prime spiral, mathematical, precise, engineered. Then another pulse struck, stronger than before, and the internal spirals snapped into alignment, forming a single coherent rotating lattice. Far below them, in Earth's crust, a faint harmonic shiver returned again. The synchronization deepened. Earth didn't know it was answering. But the structure inside 3I Atlas clearly did. Because the moment the gravitational echo returned from the planet, the internal core of the object brightened, and the hollow cavity inside rang like a bell. Not an explosion, not a rupture. A tone, a clean harmonic sound that registered across seismic arrays, magnetic sensors, and gravitational monitors. A tone with a pitch so precise it matched the faint electromagnetic pre-pulses NASA had detected earlier. The same 42 Hertz signature. A frequency used in pulse-regulated reactors. A frequency common to plasma confinement engines. A frequency associated with the activation of field-based computational grids. And now, that frequency was resonating across the solar system. Then the dust engine reacted. It reversed direction. Not gradually, not chaotically, but instantly, as if instructed. The entire internal system flipped rotational vector in a single synchronized motion, like a machine completing the second half of a mechanical cycle. The gravitational pulse changed again, not 1 beat, not 3, 2 pulses, even spacing, perfect amplitude, a new pattern. And the worst part? The pulses weren't just increasing in clarity, they were becoming directional, aimed, pointed, measured. The vector pointed not at the Sun, not at Jupiter, not at the empty void of space. It pointed directly at Earth. The gravitational engine inside 3I Atlas had locked onto our planet, not randomly, not accidentally, but deliberately, as if whatever was inside the object had finally identified its destination, and was now preparing for the next phase. For hours, NASA had watched the gravitational pulses deepen inside 3I Atlas like a heartbeat growing stronger, more confident, more aware. But at 09:18 UTC, everything changed. The pulses didn't just echo outward, they aligned. A sudden tightening, sharp, synchronized, unnervingly controlled, rippled through the object's gravitational field, pulling every instrument in 3 agencies into perfect agreement. The distortions were no longer random crests in space-time. They formed a rhythm, a shape, a structure. And then, something inside the core answered that rhythm, a flare of internal resonance, subtle, precise, registered across the gravitational wave spectrum like a whisper, pushing against the fabric of space. The return waveform wasn't chaotic, it was triangular, a 3-point harmonic that matched the axis triangulation anomaly detected days earlier. 3 points, 3 pulses, 3 meanings. The object wasn't reacting to gravity anymore, it was generating it. Inside the core, the gravitational pulses built into a standing wave, a stable oscillation impossible for a natural body of this size. The wave tightened, amplified, and then folded into itself like a contracting lung preparing for its next breath. And at that moment, the temperature inside the central cavity dropped. Not by fractions, by whole degrees. A core region that had clung to cosmic background temperature for months suddenly shifted downward. 1.7 Kelvin colder than the surrounding shell. Nothing in nature cools that fast. Not at that depth, not under compression. It was active cooling. It was preparing. The outer shell reacted instantly. The coma thinned. The dust tail constricted. Even the ionization band near the equator dimmed as if the entire body were redirecting every joule of energy inward. Then the jets inverted again. A sudden reverse flow pulse rippled down all three internal channels. Clean, symmetrical, identical in timing within 6,000ths of a second. The flow didn't just reverse. It repatterned itself, forming a spiral collapse toward the central cavity, accelerating with each rotation. It looked like a star collapsing into a magnetic bottle. The fine dust inside responded next, shifting from smooth counter-rotation into a toroidal spiral, forming a luminous ring shaped by internal electromagnetic pressure. The ring stabilized exactly where the gravitational pulses were strongest. It was building something. A chamber, a containment halo, a cradle. NASA's mass modelers ran simulations, and everyone returned the same horrifying conclusion. The object's center wasn't just hollow. It was a gravitational staging area, and whatever was inside that chamber was waking. The magnetic rotation anchor outside the comet brightened by 12%. The antitail jerked backward again, then froze mid-motion like a needle stuck in a field of static electricity. The entire dust envelope tightened around the core. The next gravitational pulse struck, stronger, sharper, so powerful that it briefly distorted background starlight behind the comet. And then a signal emerged. Not radio, not plasma, not thermal, a low-frequency oscillation buried inside the gravitational noise, slow, deliberate, repeating. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't natural, it was encoded. The waveform wasn't random. It matched a sequence NASA uses to calibrate deep space probes, a layered harmonic that corrects for signal drift across long distances. But 3i Atlas wasn't correcting for anything. It was outputting it, projecting it, directing it, not toward Earth, not toward Jupiter, toward the empty black behind it, toward whatever might be following. The realization arrived like a shock through mission control. This wasn't just a reactor. This wasn't just a system. This wasn't just an artificial interior. The core of 3i Atlas was communicating, not with us, but with something else, something it expected, something close enough to hear. And the gravitational pulses were no longer pulses. They were a call sign, a beacon, a locator, a rendezvous signal. And then the internal cavity flashed. One thin, impossible burst of structured energy contained completely inside the shell, silent, invisible to the eye, but bright enough to spike every gravitational sensor on Earth. Whatever was inside that hollow chamber had just moved, not physically, but in a way gravity itself could feel. NASA's gravitational analyst said the words nobody wanted spoken. It's not just active, it's attempting to open. And 3i Atlas, the fastest interstellar object ever recorded, began tightening its internal lattice like it was bracing for the next phase, a phase nothing on Earth was prepared to witness. The gravitational pulses didn't fade, they grew, quietly at first, subtle ripples passing through the coma, bending dust into strange spiraling paths like iron filings caught in a magnetic storm. But then the pulses began interacting with the solar wind in ways that startled even the most conservative analysts. Particles that should have been blown outward by the sun suddenly drifted sideways, skimming along unseen currents. Dust that should have fallen back into the nucleus instead hovered in suspended bands, as though held aloft by invisible threads. And deeper inside 3i Atlas, something emerged through the noise. A second gravitational frequency. Lower, slower, more controlled. One pulse. Every 9.6 seconds, a stark contrast to the 2.4-second rhythm that had dominated the last 11 hours of monitoring. Two frequencies, two systems. One researcher whispered what none of the agencies wanted to say aloud. It has an inner engine and an outer engine. The idea wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. The higher frequency pulses shaped the coma. The lower frequency pulses bent space immediately around the nucleus. Small distortions, measurable, directional. Together they created a layered modulation pattern that looked less like a natural field disturbance and more like a drive cycle warming up. Whatever lay inside the core wasn't just active, it was coordinating. Then the strangest event of the day happened. 3 distinct arcs of dust previously scattered around the trailing hemisphere snapped into alignment along a perfect geometric curve. The arc resembled a parabola, razor-sharp, bending around the nucleus with a symmetry so clean it could have been drawn with a compass. This was no accident. Every particle in that arc oscillated in time with the lower gravitational frequency, a dust ring tuning itself to the beat of something inside. The coma had become an instrument, and the gravitational engine inside 3I Atlas was playing it. NASA's L2 helioscope detected something even more unsettling. The arcs weren't merely aligning, they were transmitting. Tiny variations in particle spacing formed a repeating interference pattern. Each cycle encoded a cluster of harmonics that repeated every 18 pulses, then reset. It was information. Dust shouldn't behave like a data channel. But here it was, forming a resonance ring broadcasting a coherent gravitational modulation signature outward into space. A message, a test, a calibration, and then directionality appeared. For the first time, the gravitational pulses leaned, tilting slightly, aiming away from the sun and toward a fixed point behind the comet's trajectory. Not random, not drifting, locked, aimed, as if sending a signal to something trailing far behind or something waiting ahead. The dust ring brightened as plasma struck it, glowing like a halo around an intelligence no one could see. Meanwhile, deeper inside the nucleus, radar picked up sudden structural deviation. The core cavity, the one mapped earlier, shifted shape, only by a fraction, only for a moment, but the walls expanded, then compressed as if breathing. A contraction of 12.8 meters, a rebound of 12.8 meters, perfectly symmetrical, a heartbeat, a gravitational lung, a controlled oscillation capable of moving billions of tons of material with mathematical precision. The internal pressure change triggered a ripple across the outer shells. Layer after layer responded, distorting in harmonic sequence, like a shockwave passing through nested instruments, each tuned to a specific frequency. But the most terrifying detail came from analysis. The oscillation wasn't responding to stress, it was responding to timing. The gravitational pulse, the dust resonance, the cavity contraction, all of them aligned at the same instant. Every system synchronized to a single command. Something inside 3I Atlas had progressed from wakefulness to coordination, and now to action. The final proof came minutes later, when the dust arcs peeled apart into 3 separate layers, each one vibrating with different frequencies. The inner ring carried the lower pulses, the outer ring carried the higher ones, the middle ring carried a hybrid, a carrier wave, a structured carrier wave, a broadcast medium. The shape of the disturbance mapped eerily close to the modulation patterns of phased communication arrays, the kind used by Earth's deep space probes to amplify long-range signals. But this wasn't a probe. This was a 34-kilometer interstellar object, and its internal frequencies were rising. The next sequence hit every console at NASA simultaneously. For the first time since entering the solar system, the gravitational pulses aligned with the shape of a coded pattern, a recognizable sequence of rises and dips that resembled mathematical gating. Not language, not symbols, logic. This object wasn't reacting anymore. It wasn't defending itself. It wasn't concealing itself. It was initializing. And as the dust ring sharpened, the cavity brightened, and the gravitational engine tightened into an unnervingly stable rhythm. The question shifted from, what is inside 3I Atlas, to, what is about to come out of it? The gravitational pulses didn't fade. They began to stack. What had been a gentle rhythmic heartbeat from deep inside the core strengthened into a layered oscillation. 3 overlapping pulses, each with its own cadence, each bending space-time in microscopic ripples. None strong enough to be dangerous, all strong enough to be deliberate. NASA's monitors, built to track neutron starquakes, lit up with the signature. So did ESA's LISA path arrays. So did China's Tianjin Gravitic Lab. 3 pulses, 3 frequencies, 3 shells, the same tri-layer lattice detected earlier in the energy mapping. But this time, the gravitational fields weren't simply pulsing outward, they were interacting. On the screen, the waveforms didn't behave like emissions, they behaved like computations, One layer pulsing, another responding, the third adjusting as if mediating the outcome. It was the closest thing any scientist had ever seen to a gravitational logic gate. Inside an interstellar object, a gravitational processor, not a reactor, not a power source, a thinking core. And then something even stranger happened. The pulses began drifting, not in frequency, but in orientation. The direction of the gravitational output rotated and slowly, precisely, mapping an arc across interplanetary space, like a scanner, a lighthouse, a search pattern. And when plotted over a full 14-minute observation window, the arc snapped into focus. It was tracing a shape, a perfect equilateral triangle in deep space. 3 points, 3 edges, 3 gravitational vectors extending outward from 3i Atlas, each oriented toward a different target. One toward Jupiter, one toward the galactic center, and one, the strongest, toward Earth. The same directional pointers observed in its axis triangulation puzzle, the same alignment baked into the earlier thermal pulses, the same geometry whispered across its optical refraction lattices. Everything inside 3i Atlas was aligning with the same 3-vector blueprint. Earth wasn't just part of the map, it was a vertex. The pulses grew stronger, not destructive, controlled, calibrated, measured. But the meaning was unmistakable. 3i Atlas wasn't testing its engine. It wasn't measuring space. It was locating something, matching coordinates, cross-verifying targets, synchronizing with whatever the triangle pointed to. And as the triangulation stabilized, the gravitational pulses collapsed into a single unified beat. A heartbeat no longer exploring, a heartbeat waiting. Waiting for what? NASA didn't have time to speculate, because the next anomaly erupted without warning. The dust in the anti-tail froze mid-flight, billions of microparticles suspended in the vacuum as if gravity had switched off. Then, in a motion smoother than CGI, the entire anti-tail twisted sideways, following the direction of the gravitational scan like a compass needle snapping toward true north. Every particle, every grain, every speck of dust aligned at once. No comet does this. No debris stream acts like a metal filing on a magnet. This was choreography. The tail behaved like an antenna. Not broadcasting outward, receiving. The gravitational scan ended. The anti-tail held position. And then, inside the core, something new came online. A vibration deeper than the previous pulses. Lower than any recorded anomaly. So low that instruments didn't detect it first. Earth did. Tides shifted by millimeters with no lunar cause. A shallow atmospheric pressure wave rippled across the Pacific. Birds veered off migration paths as magnetic sensors in their bodies misfired. Even GPS satellites drifted, their atomic clocks slipping microseconds off sync before self-correcting. The object wasn't pulsing anymore, it was projecting. A silent gravitational presence sweeping across the inner solar system, like the first chord in a symphony not meant for human ears, and it kept building. Within the core, neutrino detectors showed a new pattern, a rise in flux, not from solar wind, not from particle collisions, but from internal symmetry. Something inside 3i Atlas was accelerating neutrino throughput in a rhythmic sequence. Not enough to harm anything, but enough to broadcast momentum. The object wasn't just generating gravity, it was generating mass intent. A directed field, a gravitic pointing mechanism, a gravitational finger, and all 3 vectors, Jupiter, galactic center, Earth, converged into a single point where the pulses focused. A coordinate inside the object itself, the center of the core, where the thermal pulses originated, where the optical waveguides converged, where the hollow cavity reflected tuning pulses, where the prime number plasma jets spiraled into logic, where the counter-rotating dust engine reversed momentum, where the radio null lattice blocked every attempt to see deeper. All clues had been pointing to this moment. The core wasn't a chamber, it was a device, and now that device was powering up. 3 gravitational vectors collapsed into a single point. The anti-tail flexed inward like a lily folding its petals. The magnetic anchor stabilized at full intensity. The internal dust engine accelerated. The photonic bands snapped into alignment, and the core of 3i Atlas, for the first time in recorded history, emitted a single unified signal, a gravitational note, sharp, precise, artificial, not a pulse, a ping, a call, a message sent not through radio, not through light, not through heat, but through gravity itself. A message that could only be understood by another system built on the same impossible technology. Somewhere in the direction of the object's original trajectory, something answered. The moment the gravitational pulses stabilized, something even stranger happened. Not in space, not inside the nucleus, but along the surface itself. It began as a faint shimmer barely visible in the high-contrast frames coming from the L2 Sentinel. A ripple, subtle, linear, running across the ice crust like the reflection of light on metal. But there was no light source, and it wasn't reflection. The surface of 3i Atlas was moving, not cracking, not sublimating, not breaking apart, shifting. Panels, if that's even what they were, slid across each other in microscopic increments. The ice didn't fracture the way natural crust should. NASA analysts froze the frames, enhanced the contrast, and the truth became clear. The external ice sheets weren't random deposits. They were tiles, hundreds, possibly thousands, of tiles arranged in interlocking hexagonal arrays following the same Fibonacci-derived geometry seen inside the core. They weren't static. They weren't eroding. They were responding. As the gravitational pulses strengthened, the tiles shifted again, this time more deliberately, aligning themselves into a spiral pattern around the equatorial ridge. Each tile rotated less than a degree, but together they formed an unmistakable motion, a slow, methodical tightening, a mechanical readiness. The outer shell of 3i Atlas was locking into place, like a mechanism, preparing to open, or transform, or defend itself. The gravitational waves pulsed again, this time stronger, sharper, and the surface tiles changed direction. For the first time ever, the object wasn't just reacting to energy from the Sun, or from Jupiter, or from interstellar space. It was reacting to itself, to something happening inside the core, something programming the surface to adjust. A hollow resonance echoed through the object, picked up not by sensors, but by the timing of the dust around it. Dust that suddenly began to flow outward from the comet in perfect straight lines, forming rigid paths like iron filings aligning around a magnet. These paths pointed toward the same spot on the surface, a point that had never been relevant until now, a circular indentation just north of the equatorial ridge, a hatch, a feature too smooth, too perfectly round, too mathematically aligned to have formed by ice or pressure or ancient erosion. It had always been there, hidden beneath dust, masked by rotation, buried under noise, but now it was visible, and the dust around it was moving, not drifting, but marching in narrow streams toward the indentation like metal drawn to a coil. Then the surface tiles directly above the feature shuddered, not from impact, not from heat, from command. 3 tiles slid outward 1 millimeter, a seam opened, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, light leaked from within, not reflected sunlight, not plasma, not thermal output, a controlled internal glow, gold, precise, heartbeat timed. NASA froze the frame, JAXA enhanced it, ESA confirmed it. The glow pulsed in perfect sync with the gravitational distortions. The hatch did not open further, but it had acknowledged something, a signal inside, a cycle readying, a mechanism preparing. The outer tiles snapped back into place. The seam sealed itself. The glow vanished. But the dust didn't fall away. It continued orbiting the hatch region, caught in an unseen field, suspended like fireflies trapped inside amber. And that's when the telemetry spiked. A deep low-frequency hum emanated from the object, too low for the human ear, but strong enough to shake instrument readings across 4 continents. The hum was rising, growing, layering with the internal gravitational pulses. A system was coming online. Something inside the core was energizing the entire structure, from the internal lattice to the compressed mass layer, all the way up to the surface tiles. Everything was syncing. The light, the dust, the field interference, the jets, the prime number emissions, the internal counter-rotation, the gravity pulses. All cycling toward the same point beneath that newly revealed hatch. Even before anyone said it, every scientist recognized the truth. 3i Atlas wasn't malfunctioning, it wasn't decaying, it wasn't destabilizing, it was preparing. For what? No one could answer. But the next pulse, the next shift, the next opening, would not be subtle. Whatever anomaly 13 has unlocked is about to reveal what it was hiding from the beginning. The signal didn't come from the surface. It didn't come from the jets, the tail, or the electromagnetic shell. It came from the center, the place every instrument had failed to see, the place the object had worked so hard to hide. At 10:03 UTC, the deep phase scanners at L2 caught a flicker. Not a pulse, not a flare, a shadow. A gravitational dip so thin it barely registered, like the mass of the nucleus shifted for a fraction of a second. A displacement, a relocation. NASA analysts went still. Objects don't move mass internally. They don't redistribute their center of gravity, unless they have a reason. For 3 full seconds the distortion held, a subtle tug, a change in the curvature of space no larger than a pebble dropped in a still pond. Then it snapped back, settling into a new equilibrium. The internal mass had shifted, deliberately. Within minutes the outer coma reacted. Dust spirals tightened. The plasma tail narrowed to a razor thread. Jets dimmed in perfect synchronization, like the entire object took a single quiet breath. Then the impossible happened. A thin ring of light appeared inside the core, not thermal, not reflective, not plasma. Structured luminescence, forming a loop, one that rotated independently from both the outer shell and the inner dust field. It spun faster, then faster still. Each rotation sharpened the glow, turning it from a faint halo into a burning band of white-blue radiance. The ring wasn't light, it was information trapped in motion. As it accelerated, the electromagnetic interference field around the object intensified. Radio arrays collapsed into static. Telemetry cut out. Even L2's laser-based tracking glitched, a first in its operational history, and then the halo fractured, not breaking, splitting. The single ring became 3, concentric, evenly spaced, rotating in opposite directions. The core was now a machine of geometry and motion, aligning itself like a gyroscope made of pure energy. Each ring pulsed with a frequency that matched the prime number plasma emissions detected earlier. It wasn't random. It wasn't ornamental. It was initializing. The gravitational field around 3i Atlas rippled again. This time stronger, sharper. A measurable dip that spread across millions of kilometers, bending the direction of solar particles around it like a cloak. Inside that distortion, the 3 glowing rings slowed, and then folded. Light bent inward, shapes blurred. The rings collapsed into a single vertical plane, a shimmering wall of structured energy embedded in the core. For one impossible moment, every instrument saw the same thing. Inside the nucleus, framed against the luminous field, something cast a silhouette. Tall, angular, symmetrical. A shape no comet core in the universe should hold. It didn't last long. The field pulsed once, hard enough to knock out 9 observation arrays, and the silhouette vanished. But the core did not return to silence. It spoke, not in light, not in heat, not in magnetic fields, in gravitational Morse, a pattern of micro-dips and micro-spikes timed with absolute precision. 3 beats, a pause, 5 beats, a longer pause, 2 beats. When decoded into amplitude signatures, the pulses matched the earlier prime number emissions. The core was acknowledging them, responding to them. And beneath that structured gravitational whisper came something deeper, a resonance from the nested energy lattice, shaking through the nucleus like a drumroll of space-time. It wasn't repeating anomaly 13 anymore, it was advancing it. The interior dust field reversed direction once more, accelerating until it blurred into a single seamless motion. The jet conduits shimmered with incoming heat signatures. The magnetic anchor outside surged. The photonic waveguides deep within flickered like optical nerves. Every subsystem inside the object, from the mass dampers to the plasma oscillation channels, was waking up. The structured light plane snapped into a spiral. The gravitational pulses synchronized to a heartbeat-like rhythm. The core wall glowed like a thermal shield coming online. Whatever was happening was no longer subtle. Whatever was inside 3i Atlas had stopped hiding. The nucleus brightened from within, glowing through the shells, the interference layer, the coma, until even the tail shimmered like a beacon. This wasn't drifting anymore. It wasn't reacting. It was preparing. Something inside the core was initiating a controlled emergence. Not a flare, not an explosion, a reveal. And for the first time since its arrival, observers realized they were no longer watching a comet behave unnaturally. They were watching a machine decide it was time to open. The quiet didn't last. Just minutes after the gravitational pulses stabilized, the entire telemetry grid monitoring 3i Atlas registered something no one had ever seen from any interstellar object. The core changed shape, not externally, not visually, but gravitationally. Deep field curvature maps showed the nucleus slowly shifting from a near spherical mass concentration into an elongated, spindle-shaped distribution. It wasn't rotation. It wasn't pressure. It was reallocation, as if the object were redistributing its internal gravity in preparation for something far larger. Physicists expected collapse, or fracture, or at the very least a catastrophic destabilization event. Instead, the object strengthened. Its surrounding field warped into a smooth, controlled toroidal loop, a donut-like halo of gravitational tension, perfectly symmetrical and stable, rising from the comet's core like a ring of invisible fire. This couldn't be happening. Nothing with this little mass should be able to generate a gravity loop. Even black holes struggle to maintain coherent toroidal fields. But 3i Atlas wasn't struggling. It was choosing. The gravitational ring expanded, growing brighter in the telemetry feed, a thin, shimmering distortion that bent starlight behind it into elegant, curved arcs. Astronomers stared in disbelief as stellar photons twisted around the invisible ring, tracing its shape like glowing threads. It was a lens, a designed lens, a focusing system, and it was locking onto something. The ring tightened, sharpened, and then a beam of gravitational distortion shot outward from the core, not toward the sun, not toward a planet, not into empty space. It pointed toward a single, precise region in the void, the exact arrival direction 3i Atlas came from, the same trajectory it had entered the solar system along. And for the first time, the question that had haunted every agency suddenly felt less like speculation and more like confirmation. Was this object reporting back? The beam intensified, compressing space along a narrow corridor so flawlessly that even the vacuum shimmered. Interferometers on Earth detected micro-ripple echoes bouncing through the heliosphere. Not noise, not drift, but structured packets of gravitational information. The object wasn't just opening a channel, it was transmitting. The magnetic rotation anchor flared in resonance. The synchronized plasma pulses tightened their intervals. The internal optical bands shifted phase again, aligning with the beam's curvature. Everything inside 3i Atlas was chiming in unison. Its jets, its particles, its dust engines, its mass shell, its energy lattice, its hollow resonant chamber. All of them moving to a single shared rhythm. Like the internal systems of a machine entering full operational mode. The team analysing the waveform noticed something chilling. The outgoing gravitational signal wasn't uniform. It wasn't a simple blast. It carried code, subharmonic layers, repeating patterns, nested packets of information stacked like envelopes inside envelopes. This wasn't an SOS, and it wasn't a random discharge. It was a message, a long one, a structured one, a message sent across a distance so vast that light itself seemed slow. But why now? Why here? Why inside our system? Minutes later, the second part of the event began, and it was worse. The toroidal field around the comet compressed inward and then snapped outward in a single, controlled shockwave. The distortion rolled through space like an expanding bubble, passing Jupiter's orbit, stretching all the way to the asteroid belt, shifting gravimetric sensors on Earth by barely perceptible micro-nudges. The entire solar system felt it. Barely, but enough. Inside mission control, alarms chirped, graphs spiked, and every physicist in the room froze. Because the pulse wasn't spherical. It wasn't radiating randomly. It was directional. It passed through the outer planets, past the heliopause, into deep space, along the same vector as the message beam. It was signalling something far beyond our reach, a location marker, a ping, a reply received. And then, the impossible. The returning gravitational signal, not from the comet, from deep space, from somewhere behind the stars, unbelievably faint but mathematically perfect. A reply pulse, a whisper, a return signal, echoing back across the void. 3i Atlas had called, and something had answered. The object's internal systems surged, prime number plasma jets flashing in a new sequence, the mass flex layer tightening, the internal dust reversing direction again, the photonic bands spinning into a new phase, the energy lattice compressing like a coiled spring. Everything inside 3i Atlas was preparing, constructing, sinking, awakening. The core brightened, not visibly, but gravitationally, like a star being born inside a cage of engineered matter. Telemetry showed multiple nested structural zones shifting at once, a cavity sealing, a shell compressing, an axis realigning, a mass field locking into place. 3i Atlas had received its instructions, or its signal, or its trigger, and whatever it had been waiting for had just arrived. The core pulsed, once, twice. Then all sensors across the solar system recorded the same thing, the impossible. The core of 3i Atlas opened. The gravitational pulse didn't fade the way natural distortions do. Instead, it stacked, each new wave riding atop the previous one, building a pressure that wasn't physical but spatial. Space itself felt tighter around 3i Atlas, as if the object were pulling the fabric inward, drawing a boundary around itself in preparation for whatever came next. The DSN arrays in California went half-blind. The Tianjin facility reported signal drift across all gravitational channels, and over the Pyrenees, the subterranean monitors recorded a sudden rise in microcurvature, like a heartbeat accelerating. Inside the core of 3i Atlas, something responded. A flicker, faint at first, almost invisible against the background interference, pulsed through the inner shells. Not heat, not light. Something deeper. A shift in the local mass index, a small but measurable redistribution of gravitational weight. It was like the core was rearranging itself. The concentric shells, perfect, symmetrical, Fibonacci-aligned, tightened. Millimeter by millimeter they contracted, compressing along their spherical contours as if the entire interior was bracing, gearing up for impact, release, transformation. No one could tell, but the patterns were too clean, too harmonious, too intentional. Even worse, the contraction aligned perfectly with the prime number plasma pulses observed just hours earlier. Everything inside this object was sinking. Heat, light, mass, magnetism, gravity. Like a system preparing for a single moment. Then the cavity deep within the core, the hollow space that should not exist, lit up. Not visibly, but in the radar. A sudden, razor-clean echo pulsed outward in a 4-beat cycle, repeating with exact precision. The same interval as the gravitational pulses, the same orientation as the negative gravity anomaly, the same angle as the magnetic anchor. Everything, absolutely everything, was aligning around the core. The comet wasn't drifting, it was centering itself. The anti-tail surged again, but this time it didn't lag. It stopped, froze mid-motion, as if suspended in glass. Every particle caught in place. Millions of dust fragments locked like iron filings in a magnetic field. And then, slowly, impossibly, they began to rotate. Not outward, not backward. Around a point inside the comet, a point that was moving. The cavity, 4 meters wide, wasn't stationary anymore. It was creeping toward the geometric center of the nucleus, adjusting position with movements so subtle they were almost biological. Like an organ shifting inside a living body. The symmetrical jets flared. The magnetic anchor tightened. The nested energy lattice contracted. The internal dust reversed. The gravitational pulses accelerated. All of it pointed toward one conclusion. The core wasn't just active, it was awakening. And then came the final shock. Hubble caught it first. A single thin beam of refracted light shooting from the interior cavity straight through the comet's layered shell and out into open space. It wasn't bright. It wasn't explosive. It was precise. A needle of coherent light that pierced the darkness and aimed not at the sun, not at Earth, not at Jupiter, but toward a fixed coordinate outside the solar system. A coordinate in Lyra, the same region 3i Atlas came from. The beam lasted exactly 0.41 seconds. Then it vanished. Silence. Darkness. The internal cavity dimmed. The shells relaxed. Not fully, but slightly. The gravitational pulses softened. And the object, this thing humanity had mistaken for a comet, drifted forward as though nothing had happened. But NASA, ESA, and ISRO all reached the same conclusion within minutes. This wasn't an energy release. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a signal, a ping, a confirmation, a message sent home. 3i Atlas had spoken. And somewhere in the dark between stars, something might already be answering. The strangest moment came without warning. For hours, every anomaly linked back to heat, magnetism, jets, resonance, gravitational pulses, or structural mapping, behaviors you could still frame as physics, even if stretched past breaking. But at 10:11 UTC, something happened inside 3i Atlas that didn't resemble physics at all. It resembled choice. The event began with silence. Total silence across every instrument. No jet noise, no thermal rise, no magnetic pulses, no phase drift, nothing. Just a sudden flattening of all data streams, like the object was holding its breath. Then the impossible pressure drop hit. The deep space accelerometers recorded an instantaneous change in inertial drag. A drop so precise and so synchronized that it resembled a system diagnostic, not a natural fluctuation. For exactly 1.440 seconds, the object behaved as if its mass had been reduced by nearly 7%. Not the outer layers, not the plasma. Its effective inertia, its resistance to movement, flickered. The only known systems that can do this are hypothetical, field-manipulating drive technologies discussed only in theoretical propulsion labs. NASA immediately flagged the reading as corrupt, but the backup systems, every single one, recorded the same signal. Then the core lit up, not visually, but in the data. A pulse synchronized across gravitational, electromagnetic, and thermal readings all at once. A triple-band event so clean it looked scripted. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 pulses, then a slow, rising harmonic that lasted exactly 8 seconds, spreading outward like ripples passing through invisible water. The effect reached all the way to the solar wind. Charged particles around the comet bent in curved arcs, forming a spiral shell that wrapped around the nucleus like armor. Within the spiral, the energy lattice observed earlier reconfigured itself, tightening, compressing, becoming more coherent. Inside the core, the hollow cavity measured in the radar echo began to resonate in a new mode. A deeper tone, a slower rhythm, not random, not reactive, preparatory. This wasn't maintenance, this wasn't adaptation, this wasn't calibration, this was activation, and then everything snapped into alignment. The internal dust engine reversed direction exactly when the gravitational pulses peaked. The photonic bands shifted phase at the same moment as the thermal oscillations. The magnetic anchor locked harder into space-time, reinforcing its position. The mass density gradient surged, as if the object was compressing a final layer. All parts of the system, internal, external, structural, energetic, were suddenly singing the same note. For the first time in the entire observation campaign, 3i Atlas behaved not like a comet, not like a machine, but like a single unified organism responding to an internal command. This was the spark that terrified everyone watching the screens. Because once everything aligned, the object paused, not physically, but temporally. Its internal rhythm changed from chaotic, overlapping cycles into a single synchronized pulse, a master cycle, a clock. The entire object was now beating to one internal timer. NASA, JAXA, ESA, ISRO. Everyone noticed the same implication in the telemetry. 3i Atlas had been running diagnostics. Now it was done. And the instant the master cycle stabilized the gravitational, pulses shifted into a new pattern, a rising, accelerating sequence that looked disturbingly like scanning, not outward, inward. The object was scanning, itself, mapping, indexing, preparing. The hollow cavity's resonance responded in kind, producing higher and higher harmonics that folded back into the internal lattice, like data being shuffled into new compartments. Then the thermal shell around the cavity dropped to exactly 2700 Kelvin, again matching the cosmic microwave background. But this time, it didn't drift. It locked, like a cold storage mode. Inside that frozen cavity, a faint signal, not thermal, not electromagnetic, not gravitational, appeared only once. A single spike of ultra-low frequency modulation, too weak to classify, too structured to ignore. At first it looked like noise, but noise doesn't carry phase-coded harmonics. Noise doesn't match timing offsets from 3 different anomalous systems. Noise doesn't echo. This did. The cavity rang with the signature of something inside it. Not mass, not heat, not field structure, information. For the first time, 3i Atlas wasn't just hiding something. It was accessing something. Something inside the hollow core. Something wrapped in Fibonacci shells, insulated in boron silicate, stabilized by a photonic lattice, protected by a mass-damping ring. Something that the prime number plasma pulses, the field shields, the jet reversals, and the gravitational heartbeat were all circling around like layers of an onion. All of it led to this moment. And then, the master cycle shifted again. Not downward, not random, up, accelerating, like a countdown. For nearly 12 hours, 3i Atlas had revealed layer after layer of behavior. Thermal pulses, optical lattices, counter-rotating dust engines, gravitational signatures, each anomaly more impossible than the last. But nothing prepared anyone for what happened next. At 10:41 UTC, the gravitational pulses stopped. Not tapered, not weakened, stopped. A silence so absolute it registered as a fault across 6 deep space arrays. Every instrument that had been screaming with data suddenly dropped to baseline. Flat, empty, quiet. And then the object turned. Not a drift, not a rotation, a pivot, precise, intentional, straightening its axis until it locked onto a single fixed vector in space. Not Earth, not Jupiter, not the galactic center. Somewhere else, somewhere far beyond the heliosphere, somewhere it had been pointing toward in fragments, through its jets, through its prime number pulses, through its optical bands and phased particle emissions, a direction it had been trying to align with. For the first time since entering the solar system, 3i Atlas held perfectly still. Every plume froze, every pulse ceased. The outer shell stopped shedding dust. The internal dust engine halted mid-cycle. It was waiting. Then the interior began to glow, not brightly, not violently, softly, like the first spark inside an engine that hasn't run in ages. A pale, ghost-like shimmer expanded outward from the central cavity detected earlier. The resonance lattice tightened. The compressed mass layer contracted by 4 centimeters, small but catastrophic in implication. It was charging. Within seconds, the impossible became visible even to ordinary optical telescopes. Light began bending around the object, not because it was bright, because space-time around it was warping, subtly, rhythmically, as if responding to something inside. Hubble's frame-by-frame analysis revealed the first unmistakable sign. A ring. A faint, circular distortion encircling the nucleus, then another and another. Concentric gravitational ripples expanding outward like the echo of a pebble dropped into a cosmic pond. Only one known phenomenon produces rings like these, and none of them belong inside a comet. Astronomers didn't want to believe it. They triple-checked every model, every calibration, every piece of correlated telemetry. The verdict was not a theory. It was not speculation. It was measurement. 3i Atlas was generating localized microlensing, a gravitational lens, small, deliberate, and repeated in a perfect sequence. 13 pulses, the same number as the anomaly chain. The energy lattice inside tightened again. The mass index spiked upward. The object began vibrating, not outward but inward, as if folding force into itself. It wasn't cracking, it wasn't destabilizing, it was preparing. Then, at 10:49:23 UTC, everything inside 3i Atlas ignited at once. Thermal pulses, magnetic anchors, gravitational flexing, prime number emissions, internal counter-rotation, the tuned photonic bands, the nested resonance shells. All systems went active, as if receiving a command. From where? That answer arrived 6 seconds later. A return signal, not from the Sun, not from Jupiter, not from anything inside the solar system. A deep subharmonic pulse arrived from interstellar space. Direction: Lyra. The exact direction 3i Atlas had been pointing its axis toward for 3 weeks. The exact direction it originally entered from. The exact direction it now faced with absolute unwavering certainty. Every major observatory captured the same signal. 1 pulse, then 4, then 1. The same 1-4-1 pattern detected inside the internal cavity. A signature, a match, a response. 3i Atlas answered. Its jets reversed one final time. The magnetic anchor collapsed back into its body, absorbed like a retracting limb. The anti-tail flared and then snapped forward in a perfectly synchronized arc. The resonance lattice compressed so tightly that the object's density reading jumped by 27% in under 2 seconds. Then the impossible happened. The comet didn't accelerate, it vanished. No explosion, no fragmentation, no flare, just a collapse of observable structure, like watching a reflection disappear when the water goes still. Every wavelength went dark. Radio, infrared, optical, magnetic, gravitational, gone. The only trace was a residual distortion, an afterimage in space-time that lasted a full 3 seconds before fading. What remained was a vacuum of telemetry and a single repeating signal drifting through the solar wind. 1, 4, 1, 1, 4, 1, 1, 4, 1. A final echo. A signature burned into the space it left behind. A message. Not a warning, not a threat, not an accident. A confirmation. 3i Atlas was never passing through. It was en route. And whatever called it, whatever built it, whatever waited for it beyond Lyra, now knows we saw everything, and now knows exactly where we are,